please let me open the discussion, and if anybody has a question, just come forward.
I see that are your objective, but I see that you are trying to develop a general theory of evolutionary transition.
Yep.
So, but I'm not certain that that we can call the revolution each power transition. You based your description on the decision making mainly,
yep.
if I see it right. But I think that the description of the structure or transition of structure is lacking.
Yeah. So that's exactly. Definitely, the structure is important. It's impossible to do away with the structure, but the way the structure is included in the model is through the power levels of these. When I talk about the power level of the incumbent or the opposition or the military, the ideal the ideal situation for these elements would be to take exactly the background conditions that you're talking about, taking them into account. For example, if you have a lot of alienated workers ready to sacrifice themselves, and that means that a stronger opposition vis-a-vis the incumbent. So optimally, when you talk about the power, so optimally the ideal is having these exogenous parameters, exactly the ones that you were talking about, and Marx was talking about, and Strasbourg was talking about, to be put in the model, but at the same time give the decision-making also a part in the theory. But sure, so that comes in the definition of those power levels.
So perhaps you can spend some time talking about how you do these formal models, like, because people have seen some diagrams, but they have no idea what those variables stand for. So you may explain, you may pick one of those models and try to explain its logic and how it helps your analysis.
Yeah. So you want me to do that, or?
Would people be interested in this exercise?
Yeah. Okay. So the idea is that let me see what happens. So it might be summer, but I should have it. So you look for the equilibrium of the game, of the repeated games. I don't have it. I mean, it should be summer. But if you have an interaction, do you have the game diagrams? The trees? No, not these. Yeah. No, I have actually found it. Yeah, okay. No, actually. So, yeah, if you, okay. So, these are basically, the concept, the solution concept that they use is Markov perfect equilibrium. So I apologize for people who are not interested in mathematics, of course some people are doing them. So when you get a repeated game, so the idea to simplify, because these things are all dynamic, so I assume that when the decisions are made, they actually change the power levels. What I want to see is that if this interaction goes on and on and on, in the static case, in the steadiest state, what might be the equilibrium? So I look for Markov perfect equilibrium, which means so the idea is that when you make the loop and go back, you are in the same shoes that you were in the previous time period. Right? So if you have an assumption that is somehow unrealistic, but you need to make it for having a tractable solution, then you can solve for the value of each of these decisions. So, for example, for the opposition, either rejecting or accepting an offer, and that can then you can find the equilibrium. You can see which value is larger based on the decision of the dominant power. So there is this is for the decision of the opposition. The dominant power is authoring something when they try to appease the opposition, and what they want to do is that they want to make the opposition. They just want to give them just enough spoils that make them indifferent between rejection and acceptance. So you want to find the minimal amount that you can of, let's say, the power sharing mechanism that they become indifferent between accepting and not accepting. So knowing about the value of these things, you would know how much they would give for appeasement. And then knowing that how much they go for the appeasement, they can actually make a decision between appeasement and routing. So an interesting thing about this is, when I was playing with this, so one of the interesting issues that I encounter is if the offer of compromise is preordained. Let's say, for example, in the Lebanese. So just assume the Lebanese situation. You have a parliament. There's a power sharing mechanism. Hezbollah is involved in some type of political interaction with the incumbent, right? Or with the Americans. The idea is that the offer of compromise is a stilted, which means Lebanese parliament has a strange and somehow particular situation where the number of seats that are allotted to each sect is fixed. Which means if you are a Shia or if you're a Sunni from a Sunni sect or from your Daruz, the number of maximum seats that you get is fixed. So if you have that situation, then actually you can see in the model that it would be more probable for a group to reject the offer. Because they know that so sometimes, they're not going to get spoils proportional to their power level because they're fixed. So you might have a group that is very powerful, but by accepting peace, they do not get the same, somehow the nominal share of the spoils. So they decide to fight because they know that the compromise wouldn't be a profitable situation for them. So again, I went to a tangent. So that's another implication of the model class.
So just to make it clear, so the input variables per model are power levels of all the three agents, and the model defines how those power levels are affected by the process going on,
or what decisions are made, what equilibria are chosen, what equilibria are going to be applicable based on that exact power. So the first model only one element, that is the power of the position. Well, it's all relative, right? So the second model, when you have the military, would be two power levels. So you just normalize one of them to one, and then you have two other elements. And then the comparative statics would be based on exact power levels.
And you just leave it as a black box what determines the power level? Like the input power level? Or
the input, in the beginning?
Yes.
The beginning power. Well, yeah, that's exactly. That would be a matter of empirics. So, in a complete study, I need to actually look into historical cases and try to somehow have some crude way of coding these power levels, and that's a challenge, of course. So I'm planning to do that later. Actually, that's the next challenge. But usually these type of codings in political science are very crude. So it has been done before, but not. That's the challenge. That's the indirect challenge.
I like theory also, but and also I think it's good to describe the situation in other countries. But I consider decisive to deal with the situation in one home country. And not only to describe, and also to think about the outcome, but also I think it is necessary to know how to do it. Who will be the force to make the change? What can you say about the situation from this point of view in the Czech Republic?
So what happened in 1968?
What do you think about the situation in Czech Republic, if possible? Because there is a general discontent of the public. According to the last public poll, more than 80% are not satisfied with the political situation in the Czech Republic. So the situation goes right, I would say, I dare say, that some changes are to be expected. But when I ask somebody in this country, what should be the outcome?
I think that's a good point, because so all what I talked about is having assumed that you have the wheels of history in motion. So you actually you have started. You have people in the streets. But that question is how this starts. You know what? I probably it's hard to answer your question, because if there was a way, the state would block it, and everybody would know about that state. These things are very random. So if I could give you an answer, the state would actually expect it and block that type of. There's a high probability that way would have been blocked. So there was a quote from Foucault. Actually, I have it at the beginning of the write-up that in studying most of these events, we shouldn't look for regularities, but actually irregularities, the mistakes. I think that the beginning of most of these events, they are actually mistakes that are not anticipated by anybody. So you have the cases of self-bearing, self-immolation in Tunisia, where started the uprising, and it was very completely unexpected. But at the same time, you had a similar situation in Czech Republic, in Czechoslovakia in 1968. Somebody set himself on fire, but that didn't really start it the way it was meant to be. So, again, I guess the only answer that I have is these are mistakes on the side of the incumbent, or surprise, put things in motion. And if I had a concrete answer for you, then something would have been wrong, because then the exact same venue would have been blocked. Would have been blocked by the ones who actually would not like it. They would try to anticipate those responses and try to get rid of any background conditions that might bring them about. So these are mistakes, and mostly not predicted.
So it is a theory which is written afterwards, after the movement and events.
But no, but the idea, but the idea was that actually by looking into newspapers, exactly. So this is actually a very good question. So the idea was by looking into newspapers, these naive, very, I mean, these are reporters who are not probably even sophisticated thinkers, not many of them. But it's a good thing. So we don't want anybody to interpret these interactions. So exactly as you say, we should never probably trust the narrative afterwards, especially because these are attempts at taking over the source of legitimacy and the source of actually writing the history. These are the ones, most of the people who take over, they are the ones who rewrite the history. So it would be a mistake to go and look at the accounts after the effect. So my hope was that by reading things before, reading the accounts before things are solidified, I might have a better view. So that's why I have the newspaper snippets. Because these have been written while these things were happening.
What role you see of media in the hands of those who have power in their hands? I think this is an important question, according to me, because the manipulation of the conscience of the human being is probably very, or maybe most important. People who don't actually accept their position in society and act not according to their position in the society, they are not able to take part in the revolutionary change or in any change of the situation.
Yeah, you're right. I think so. That's what I think that was somehow the essence of what I said, because I said the absence of the media, the centralized media, the state-controlled media actually would have a positive effect, because people would develop an idea of risk, for example, that is independent of the state. The state would lose the venue for control if they are non-existent. If you have if you have a crucial situation, all of a sudden, when the state doesn't have those elements, they can't. So they can't exert control, and I think that sometimes misinformation or some lack of information, not knowing is better, is more somehow helpful in these situations when people are trying to make a decision to engage in a very risky situation. Because so if let's say if you have military power, you can exert it if you can threaten people. If there's no way to actually convey the threat, how would they know how can you dissuade people from coming out tomorrow? So the idea, going back to the beginning, so Schumpeter also has the same idea about democracies really manipulating. In democracies, the voting results are not the product of the opinions of the masses, but it's actually the manipulation of the elites. But it's through the media. My major question is if that doesn't exist, how the process would proceed. So that's the major curiosity of this study. That's a major question, along the same suspicions that you have.
I have a nice instance of bluffing for you. In the 1998, the Czechoslovakian secret police faked a student killed by the police suppressing student demonstration, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it to signal strength of the regime, but rather to provoke some moral indignation of the population.
Uh-huh.
So if you say that those events are to a large extent result of like some random events, mistakes, and perhaps like bluffing, so does this narrative sort of put a big role, give a big role to like some, power plays, some like, some even like some conspiracies or stuff like that, or like really like some. So how does your concept illuminate what's going on during such revolutionary processes?
So because I remember something, I had actually a footnote in one of these drafts about development actually in Czech Republic. Somebody, it was about the killing of a student that later on turned out to be a rumor. Was that in the book?
Yes.
What year was it?
It was
It was in 1989, right?
The rumor by intention.
By intention?
Mm-hmm.
But how do you think it was intention? Do you know? I mean, do we know that it was? So this is a question that I always face. Exactly. There is this conception. There's this somehow tendency after the effect. So there are things that we don't know how this rumor was shaped, right? Because the shaping of the initiation of the rumor can be a very complex thing. It's a domino effect. It's not necessarily. So there is this conception of that we always want to regenerate control and authority about these things. So sometimes, even in these Egyptian developments, things happen, and the opposition gains ground. There's so many people who claim it. So many people who are saying that they made the decisions, they called the shots. So maybe if you have a strong, indicators that the rumor was initiated by one single authority, well, I guess I give you the credit. But I think that a rumor itself is actually the exact example of the same process that I'm talking about. That it can be a domino effect. You might be a very connected person. I just tell you, I might have heard or might have insinuated this thing. I tell you, and then you tell a lot of people. Not so the possibility of a central source of a rumor. Sometimes it's just a speculation. It's our tendency to rationalize things. There's this tendency for rationalizing everything, and that's something that I want to somehow debunk. I don't take that for granted. That was the major debate between Lenin and Trotsky, I think, about the role of the revolutionary leaders and the masses. That's the major question. Who makes the decisions, and if that rationalization is so I'm suspicious about the idea about rationalization and putting the mask of control and authority on all of these developments. I'm not sure if that might be I think there are other processes that are in action. People interact with each other in ways that not necessarily the same as having one person making all the decisions at the top, or the rumor or not having it.
I ask questions because nobody is asking. Otherwise, I would be quiet, silent. According to me, I am an economist as my first profession, second international relations, as I mentioned. But for me, the most important problem to be solved nowadays is that the situation is growing revolutionary as far as existence of capitalism is concerned. I tell you why. Capitalism according to me, can function when somebody is producing and somebody is consuming. Then, to prolong the situation of people being able to buy, they recommended them to lend money. The resistance of capitalism was prolonged in general, but up to a certain time, because those people who were buying by loan will be obliged not only to pay back, but at the same time to have less money than before. So the situation seems to be growing critical for the system as such, for the system called capitalism. I don't know whether you know capitalism, the word capitalism, the term, was for many years some cruel word, some word which should not be used, mentioned at all. Now it is changing. But not to elaborate more, my question is the one I said. According to me, from the economic point of view, capitalism is growing to progress. Basically.
Sure, but so there would be cycles. I think that there are cycles, and then the major question that you're asking is, what are the results of the collapse, right? What might be the end result of such interaction? So whenever you get the end of the when it becomes unstable at some point, revolutionary situation comes about, and then what we're trying to think of is what are the alternatives, what are the other options. So,
I'm interested in the question of the law during the transition to law.
The law?
No. Because the situation in the transition is, I think, out of joint, out of law. And if you can indicate the moment that the law is out.
Exactly. So, by law, you mean the legal system being transformed, or are you talking about the lack of law at all? Is that what you mean? Because okay, so you have, I think. So let's. I use this question to actually move to somehow link what I'm saying to another area in political theory. That is the founding studies, right? There's political founding, legal founding, constitutional founding. So you get a transition, right? You get a transition from the previous legal system, let's say, to a new legal system. And what I talked about, so the whole idea is that you have two phases. So you have the collapse phase and the construction phase and the founding phase. And I think that a lot of thinkers, including Arendt and others, just more recently Andreas Kaligos, who've written books and articles on this, they usually talk about the second phase without really thinking about the first phase. And sometimes in the Arendt's case, by just rejecting it as apolitical, while I think that there is a strong link between the two. So the result, the constitutional, the legal result that you get in the second phase is closely connected to the nature of mobilization and collapse. So you can see it, for example, in the American and French cases, the difference. So that's kind of, again, the type of comparison that has been invoked a lot. Like for the Iranian case as well. So when you have a totalitarian mobilization, when you have universal mobilization, the way that you had in France, in Russia, and Iran, then you're more likely those emotions extended in time. There are wars that they start and they actually feed on those emotions. The Russian case, Iran, the French, just very quickly, maybe after 15 years. And this is the same type of, the same type of emotions that are being generated during or sentiments that are being generated during the first revolutionary phase. Broadly speaking, the American case, if it's a revolution, because it was very much pre-mediated, didn't really generate that type of mobilization. So the type of constitution building that you get later, it's very different from these cases, or party building. So exactly, I'm talking about the first phase. There's a destruction.
Did you say the totalitarian movement? That's you used the word totalitarian.
No, that's okay. So you
and that is the totalitarian movement. I think that the word
is probably
is programmed because that it is a word that compromises the whole complex of aspects of the society as a wholeness.
Or applicability of these movements, it is a major question in political theory, if it's good or bad, if direct democracy is a good model or not. Direct democracy might be totalitarian, right? If you want to think about the decisions of the mass as a whole. So I'm saying, yes, I know that the word has negative connotations, but again, I think in a revolutionary situation, I think that the situation, especially the collapse phase, is illiberal. Because otherwise it would be very difficult to overcome the apparatus of the incumbent regime as an individual. There should be, I think, individual being put behind the group or the cause. So I try not to use the word totalitarian. But again, you have a whole. You have the idea of a whole united for one cause. Yes.
So only my remark.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think that the military role of militaries are similar in general in Arabian states and in Europe? Do you think it's similar or deeply different in societies during the history?
Yeah. So I guess it's a matter of generalization. I understand that definitely the situation, even in, let's say, in Arab countries, probably there's a difference between one country to another country. In European cases, between, let's say, the France and Czechoslovakia. But the idea, I think, the hope is that, is for making things abstract, theory building actually relies on some type of generalization and building these, ideal notions of things. If I want to build a general, somehow narration of the interaction, I have to make the assumption that a very similar process works in both cases, and then start from there, and then work my way through different cases. I say, okay, there's this one general process, and then in Europe, these are the things that are different. In the Middle East, there are these elements that are different. I guess that's the way that probably theory building works. We're trying to import that type of a spirit. Does it answer your question? Why I'm doing this, why I'm equating the two cases. So I want to build a general explanation first, and then account for differences by going down on different paths and tangents. It's an instrumental decision, a methodological decision. But they're different, sure. Czechoslovakia is not the same as Egypt.
What's your link to the Max Weber theory.
What is more?
Max
What is
Weber.
more? What is more? What is more?
Your connection between your theory transition and Max Weber, Max Weber.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question. Yeah, I know. So I've been actually just recently, I went back to the so there's an English translation of his work in Economy and Society. And there's, I don't know, this is a translation of some parts of his work just in English. It might be different. I don't think that it's a very well-established collection, but he tried to devise a theory of revolution, so, but he never really wrote it up. So I don't know if you've seen it when he talks. So he has this discussion of city estates and cities, and does that ring a bell? Have you seen that those parts of writings? No? About how the construction of a city as a unit of governance work plays out in the European history. So, and he wanted to write the theory of his theory of revolution as an appendix to that part of his theory building. You know why? I have a guess. It might be because, look, all of these things that he talked about, all of these historical events, they happen in urban environments, in cities, where you have concentration of power, right? And then popular uprising is more probable, is more prone to actually so the incumbent is more prone to a quick collapse. It's very concentrated. In France or in Russia, it didn't happen everywhere around the country. It happened only in one city. It was in Petrograd, it was in Paris, it was in Tehran, it was in Beijing, and then it spreads around. So I think that's an amazing insight. But then, so this is a structuralist, kind of Foucaultian point. But then there is the notion of he's being elitist. He's very much, and also is a kind of a strategic thinker. His notion of charisma was useless, it seems, for finding any theory for revolutions, and that's a failure of his definition of charisma, because for him, charisma was an individual thing, right? And so the more recent scholars have tried to. So what I'm saying is that the central element of his theory of extra legal foundation or extra legal power, that would be revolutionary power, was charisma. That was a very elitist and very personal issue, and he was incapable of actually extending that to popular movements. And I guess that was his disappointment. He never really could do that. And then, so it's interesting there are people who are trying to resurrect to that type of, they're trying to find a form of collective charisma. So again, and I don't think that really works. I think that's kind of a dead end. And sure, he's incapable of, I think, generating material.
Okay, but I hinted at something else. I thought that your theory building is connected with Weber's conception of ideal types.
Yeah.
I guess correct.
Yeah, you're right. But it's a methodological exploit. Yeah, it's a method-related issue. But conceptually, I'm saying he failed, in my opinion, in producing a theory. But sure, most of what the social science that people do in academia, especially in the U.S., is actually Weber-based. Is based on his methodology. His methods and his ways of thinking, sure. But I guess the other one that actually really interested me for a while was the conceptual one, how he doesn't have. I mean, he talks about rule and governing and military and these amazing, brilliant talk about the interaction of these elements, but there's no actually modular theory of revolutions. He doesn't have. He can't have. He couldn't think of the theory. So the Germans, it's funny, I think the failure of 1848 among the Germanic states and the success of 1871 somehow gave this illusion, gave this somehow elitist illusion to a lot of German thinkers afterwards, between 1870 and the mid-20th century. They're very non-democratic. They are, and I kind of, I mean, that's my hunch, that 1848 for them really was a failure. 1848, all the revolutions, the mass revolutions, while when they would compare to 1871, where the decisions of a few politicians made things happen. Some of the ideals that actually existed in 1848, and that gave the impression. Might have been just a historical coincidence.
But he influenced the some authors from Marxist tradition, for example, Georgi Lukács.
Yeah.
Or Adorno, with creative theory.
Yeah. That's true.
Any questions?
Dovolíte mě ještě jednu otázku? My really last question concerns your country.
Yeah.
Not long ago, there was an acute danger that your country will be attacked by force. Now it seems to me this acute situation is a bit over.
Yeah.
Because it proved that it is possible to use the real armed force of USA for destroying the country, but there is not enough technical means and human means to rule the country through some kind of puppet government. Therefore, it seems to me, and we have some experience in this case, that because some aspects of the society in your country, according to me, are asking for updating. It seems to me that in case the government of Iran does not take into consideration that it is necessary as far because of globalization, no country can exist independently, and that these aspects which need updating will be used for forming, supporting discontent internally in the country. So the question is, I don't think Iran will be attacked from outside, but Iran will be the aim of internal involvement, internal interference.
So, I mean, yes, sure. Well, I guess the interesting thing about Iran is it was just recently in China, and I came back. I think from my observation is any revolution, that's the definition, good or bad. It's the reactionary or non-reactionary is actually bringing about something that is very new. It's a new beginning for those countries, for those countries, and exactly the raison d'etre of Islamic Republic is actually, or the revolutionary governments in that sense, is because they don't want to the company, the organization. So that's for them. Some of even these movements. So this is very frankly speaking, we have been a reaction to globalization. So it's interesting that you have countries that make this informed decision not to engage let's say, the markets or the international society, and that's a reality of that policy. So for them, it was a move to the traditions that they wanted to use to build a completely different society. And they took over the state apparatus. They changed everything. They changed the ways the military works, the bureaucracy works. It became a completely different thing. And I guess that's what defines a revolution. It's just that's something that's so surprising. It's just not. This is something about not going down the same path with others. It's just a new beginning. It's as surprising as it gets.
Anti-modernist revolution, we can call it.
It can. It has happened. It has happened in Iran, which is a complete. It has all the characters of some modern, procedurally modern revolution, but toward a very different road.
Does it mean that you see some attempts to modernize the association by the existing government?
Well, that's the question that the government might face at some point and should find an answer. It's the same way that the Chinese government has really faced that question and has made decisions. But exactly, at some point, perhaps they will have to make decisions, and I guess that the Chinese case is interesting because they have made their own decisions. And so it might actually happen for the Iranian case.
So, any more questions? If there are no questions, let's see.
Oh, thank you.
No, go ahead.
I'm not sure if we can talk about revolution now, for example, or in the 21st century, because we deal with concept of revolution from 19th century, and I think it doesn't work a little bit now, and I feel I'm not any good explanation for it, but I think that now it's much more narrative. It's narration, but I cannot explain deeply. I explain it. This my idea deeply because I would say it's much more narrative or symbolic than revolution in the sense of 19th century in societies of 19th century.
Exactly. So we know I guess the theory building is based on these famous cases where there was a lot of attention toward these things, toward the events. So the idea is to get ideas, to see the procedure, and then try to extrapolate it to other events. It might not necessarily have the same connotations of an anti-modernist, let's say, movement toward the end of the 20th century, going back to a very different ideology, but in a very different setup. Because that type of change is impossible, as you said, in the 21st century. But the idea is that to generalize, to find a platform and apply it to the cases that might be the mild versions of these type of turnovers. For example, I think that Egyptian and Tunisian cases are partial revolutions. right? The military didn't engage, so it didn't have actually the collapse of the military. Perhaps maybe in 20 years, nobody would call them revolutions. We just went through them 6 months ago, and we think that they were very interesting events. But what if it just becomes, these two countries become military dictatorships after a while, and just probably all this aura of revolutionary thought would evaporate. So we have this type of explanation and Islamization, and we want to employ it in cases that might actually be partial realizations of the theory. The partial events, the partial revolutionary events, not full revolutionary events from the type that you saw in, let's say, in Russia or Iran, might happen everywhere. Last year there was some uprisings in Thailand, right? They didn't work out. Remember the Reds there was one in I think it was in Kyrgyzstan, in Bishkek. There was a turnover of the. So you have these failed or partial attempts, and they happen all the time. But we just forget about them. So I think somehow dissecting these events would be beneficial for actually talking and discussing these type of events as well as the most famous examples.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your lecture because it was very interesting, and particularly in Czech Republic, because in Czech Republic I mean Czech political scientists or sociologists, we are not used the models you use. Czech political scientists use narratives or historical comments, but not general model theory-based. I graduated from sociology, but I haven't had any courses about game theory or theory of rational choice. So it was very interesting, but I think that it's very squeal for Czech public, but I think it's very useful. But it's similar to economic models. But I don't know any Czech political scientists who would use this model for analyzing political situation, for analyzing revolution. They would use historical studies or case studies analyze, but not this.
So I guess I should have a comment on this. I think that most of the things that I talked about are mostly conceptual. So I said, let's look at the procession of the events, when events happen one after another. We really didn't talk about that much. I mean, I think mathematics in these things, it would be they have a descriptive role. It's just I think the rational thinking or some type of ways of, it's a scientific whim or hope that actually parsing these elements might make us think about them in more effective ways. That's the only hope. So I don't think that even the game theory behind it, when it becomes heavy machinery, would be useful. I don't think it's useful. I think it's very much like it's a for clarificatory concept. It's for clarification. For just thinking, trying to think, okay, so why this event happened? What would have been before it that might have made it happen? And that's exactly, I think, that might be in contrast to the narrative-based. So I don't think that even we need really complicated game theory or other mathematical models to have that type of parsing process. In that sense, there is hope for anybody who's interested in working on narration in terms of consuming these things or generating them.
Generalization, it's I don't know this word in amount of Czech political sciences.
I see. Yeah, exactly. So that's
historical.
So
studies.
I think. So that's the question that I had to. I ask everybody: has anybody looked at history with some type of rational choice mindset or some type of rationalistic view and scientific view? I haven't seen it. I don't think it exists actually even among American historians. It's very rare. I haven't seen it.
And so, do you think there is a drawback to incorporating your narrative into some general model, because it could as well it could lead you astray. Do you think it could happen? Like, for example, your concept that revolutions are result of mistakes. It could be an artifact of the fact that in rational choice, I mean, violence is not on the equilibrium path because it's costly. So if you observe violence, it's always result of some miscalculation or mistake. But at the same time, and this is completely, it's fair to describe the situation in this way, but the fact that you are approaching the situation with this concept is the result of trying to structure it as a rational choice model.
So, well, that's interesting. Yes, you're saying that, who can claim that the reality wouldn't actually fit itself to the rest of the theory? I think that's something that a very well-known sociological critique of science in general. That actually, I think there's an interaction, right? The way reality fits in your theory, actually, there's an interaction. But at the same time, I had a rational answer to you. That if the spark, if the beginning of spark was predictable, then there is a high probability that it could have been avoided by people who bear that damage, including the state. If, for example, if the Tunisian government knew that person, Bernie himself, would have actually caused that chain of events, they wouldn't have done it. Or, it would have been, or if they knew about the location of the person, and so on, not even about the process of the person, if they knew that person actually would be so instrumental, they would have avoided it somehow. So there is some level of randomness that brings these things, and that's actually rational somehow response to your. So I'm using the same platform to give you a response.
I mean, like, of course, there is some always unpredictability involved, but at the same time, like, if some people want to, because you were criticizing some.
I'm criticizing the agency. So I think that a lot of these events, they are not necessarily controlled by one single source of agency. That's what I'm saying.
But I mean, like, so these people who are trying to look into, like, causes for this revolutionary upbringing, they would construct some structuralist account, perhaps.
Yeah.
And you, by the virtue of applying this sort of models, you would look more at those decisions and the mistakes and calculations. So the kind of narrative come. So is there a way, like, how to combine all those approaches into, like, some master narrative? Like, how?
Yeah, sure.
How are you going to proceed?
Yeah, I think they're complementary. But what I'm saying is, if you have a parameter, I think that actually that's a scientific wish. So if you have a parameter that can take into account the background conditions, that would actually satisfy your concerns. Would somehow be a good response to your concerns. So let's call it power. With the virtue of its being a background condition, we can actually measure it, let's say, scientifically, because it's there. That's the whole. So there's something that is there, is a static. I can actually describe it, input it into an element, into a measure, and then import it to the theory, and put it actually in the driving seat. So it's funny, we have come to full circle. So a structural condition actually telling me what the decisions are going to be made. I think it's actually, this is very interesting, because you see the interactions. We come back to the same point. So a structure that's had a point. This is a matter of, this is a clarification those things showing how decisions are made because of some of the constraints in the background.
Okay, so thank you very much.